So we'll start with metabolic acidosis. We know that from the diagnosis lecture that it's characterized by low plasma pH and a low plasma bicarbonate. As mentioned, we'll look at the causes. We've already done, because I think metabolic acidosis we did quite a bit in the diagnosis lecture. Still, I'll just repeat it briefly here. Diabetic ketoacidosis is one of the most common presentations of metabolic acidosis. It's a complication of diabetes, uncontrolled diabetes. So this is one of the most famous causes of metabolic acidosis. Number two is excessive diarrhea. We know that alkali is lost via feces. So excessive diarrhea will take out alkali and also will disbalance the acid and base balance in the body, leading to acidosis. Bicarbonate will be lost. Chloride will be more in comparison, and hence the body will go into metabolic acidosis. Then the kidney itself can be an issue. It may go into failure or RTA, renal tubular acidosis, in which case the tubular cells are damaged. They cannot excrete your normal acid load and replenish bicarbonate. So this is a big issue with the kidney itself, and hence a significant cause. Compensations we have already done, but this is a more structured approach to the compensations. Remember, there are, under the acute phase, you have the chemical buffers inside the cell and in the ECF. Then you have the respiratory system, and in the long term, we mentioned the kidney. Okay, so the concept here basically is that all three basically are engaged with every acid-base disorder. It's only the amount or the role, the extent of the role that they play, and the timeline that they play it at, that differs. So ICF and ECF buffers will come into play, of course, as soon as there will be acidosis, and then respiration will play a significant compensatory role in addressing the pH change by adjusting its ventilatory rate. It will depress it 1.3 mmHg for each drop in bicarb. 1 milli equivalent per liter drop in bicarb is balanced by depressing the respiration, so that the PCO2, I beg your pardon, I've been saying depressed. It's basically the PCO2 is depressed by increasing the respiratory rate. So your patient of metabolic acidosis will come to you in the ER hyperventilating, so that the PCO2 is decreased. Okay, so be very clear about this. I actually showed a table as well at the end of the second diagnosing acid-base disorder lecture that also has this information in a nice, easy format to learn. And at the end, I could not emphasize this under compensations in that second lecture, is that at the end you do go to kidney. Although yes, we know that the problem was kidney itself, it did not handle the bicarb nicely, but still this is the master place where everything goes for mathematical grade correction. So eventually kidney has to pull up its socks and address the issue, and basically make a bicarbonate, reabsorb it properly, make new bicarbonate, and address the original issue, its job, which it did not do initially because of one thing or the other. Okay, so this is metabolic acidosis with some emphasis on the cause. Now, the problem with metabolic acidosis is twofold. One, it is very common. So you will come across metabolic acidosis more than other acid-base disorders. And the second is the list is long. So what do we do about it? It is a long list. It would be nice if we could categorize it along any lines. So the good thing is, yes, there is a way to do it. So Anion Gap is one of those concepts which we basically use to extrapolate this whole thing. Um, Remember that this is just a concept. There is no gap. There is no gap in anines or cations. In fact, the sum of cations and the sum of anines are in complete balance in the body. But this is an ingenious way. This is a conceptual framework by which what we do is we basically say that, all right, sodium is the main cation. Okay, so sodium in the cation category, let's say sodium is it, and the unmeasured cations, basically potassium, calcium, magnesium, they are in small amounts and fairly constant, so we can ignore them. All right, and it equals the sum of cations. And on the cation front, we have chloride and bicarbonate as the two main anions, I beg your pardon. On the anion front, we have chloride and bicarbonate as the main anions, while there's a small portion of anions which are unmeasured. Again, they are small and known. They include protein, phosphate, citrate, sulfate, and similar anions. So we don't measure them. We say that, let's say, these are unmeasured anions. Just stay with the program. You'll see how this works out in favor of what we're trying to do. So again, the equation is sodium plus unmeasured cations is equal to chloride and bicarbonate plus those unmeasured anions. Okay, we solve it for unmeasured anions, which, by the way, can be called anion gap. Okay, because this is where the gap is. We have left a gap here. Okay, to extrapolate what we want. So we solve this equation for this. We call it anion gap, and then this is the new equation. Sodium, because this went here, so it will be subtracted from sodium. Sodium minus chloride plus bicarbonate. Okay, so this remains intact. The added brackets are there. My mathematics is a bit rusty, but this bit I know. So you basically subtract the main cation from your anions. This is the anion gap, and the value obviously will come out to be something, because you have not measured this bit here, and you are subtracting this whole thing from this whole thing, while this is not being measured, right? So obviously it will give you some mathematical value, and this is that mathematical value. So 8 to 16 milliequivalents per liter of an anion gap is present normally in all of us. Again, I would repeat for emphasis that it's just a concept. There is no gap. There is no mismatch between cations and anions. It's just that we keep this vague. We keep this a gap, a mysterious gap. We leave it. We of course know what's happening here, but just for mathematical reasoning, we leave it, and we draw up this equation like this, actually generate whatever value of anion gap there is. So it's 8 to 16 milliequivalents per liter, with the rest of everything being known, i.e. sodium, chloride, and bicarb, all of them are known. The unknown obviously is 8 to 16 milliequivalents, and this is that anion gap. Okay, this is this portion of the whole scenario. Now, why are we even doing this? So let me just give you a generic scenario. Look, if in this person with the normal anion gap of this, this guy takes up an acid, or develop a condition in which there is increased acid either ingestion or production inside the body. Okay, what's going to happen? Acid will have its own specific anion, right? So that anion will be added here, because bicarbonate and chloride are known. Okay, if it's chloride based, it will be known, and if it's it's based on any of these, it will be known. If there is another anion which has been added to it, the value of this anion gap will change, and that's how we catch the culprit. So in the presence of a low pH, and a low bicarb, the diagnosis of metabolic acidosis is arrived at. Further differential diagnosis is look at the anion gap. If the anion gap is increased, the list becomes shorter. However, if the anion gap is the same, you'll be thrown off on this statement, but just hang on, stay with me, we'll sort this out. So there are two possibilities: whether your metabolic acidosis patient will have a normal anion gap, or whether this chap will have an increased anion gap. This will draw the long list of metabolic acidosis causes into two: metabolic acidosis with normal anion gap, which is a shorter list, of course, and metabolic acidosis with increased anion gap, which is the second part of this long list. So it's much more manageable to now look at this patient, take the history, do a good examination to narrow down further from either of these shorter lists. Okay, so let's see, scenario one. You have lactic acidosis or diabetic ketoacidosis. Okay, lactic acidosis, the anion would be lactate. Okay, in lactic acidosis, lactic acid basically gets buffered with bicarbonate to form lactate. So lactate will be the anion. In diabetic ketoacidosis, as we've mentioned before, there are keto acids, beta ketobutyrate, and acetoacetic acid. Basically, these are the ones which will be the anions. Okay, what happens to the anion gap? Let's see. Okay, so this scenario has been labeled as normochloremic or normochloremia. What has happened is you have added either lactic or a keto acid to the ECF, right? That bit is clear. Now let's solve the an anion gap equation. It was sodium minus chloride plus bicarb, right? So these anions do not feature here. Okay, only chloride and bicarb feature here. And since they are acids, they will obviously consume your bicarbonate. The bicarbonate goes down, which results in the anion gap increasing above normal. I hope you got this. In this particular case, when you have added certain anions like lactate or keto acids, or in methanol poisoning, you have formic acid forming. In uremia, you have sulfuric or phosphoric or hippuric acid retained due to kidney failure, or salicylate is basically another generic name for aspirin. Somebody has overdosed on aspirin, so salicylate is the anion which causes acidosis. In all of these examples, basically the bicarb would naturally go down, okay, because naturally it's metabolic acidosis, which then raises the it raises the anion gap. So now we say that our metabolic acidosis is of the normochloremic increased anion gap variety. Why do we call it normochloremic? Hang in there. I will let you know in the next slide, inshallah. Okay. For now, I hope this is clear. Okay. Increased anion gap causes of metabolic acidosis, famous ones are right here on this slide. Okay. Now, what happens in diarrhea? What happens to anion gap in diarrhea? Excessive diarrhea would cause metabolic acidosis, right? Because it's the alkali is lost excessively in the excessive diarrhea. The feces go out, taking along excessive alkali. That basically creates an imbalance between alkali and the stomach acid. So the resultant is basically metabolic acidosis. Now, in diarrhea, this is what happens. Plasma bicarb obviously goes down with it because it's a metabolic disorder. Chloride goes up because of the imbalance between the alkali lost in the intestinal fluids and the comparatively increased HCl present in the stomach. So chloride, now you solve this anion gap. equation. Chloride goes up, bicarbonate always will go down because of the metabolic nature of the disorder. Voila, the anion gap comes out to be normal. And that's why we call it hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis, as opposed to, let me go back, as opposed to normochloremic metabolic acidosis. Okay, now you understand. It's the key also is chloride. Basically, the key is chloride. If chloride is constant, then the anion gap will go up. Naturally, the mind will go to these causes, which are obviously fewer than a horrendously long list of causes. Okay, and if you have the chloride is going up and you have a normal anion gap, then the list is again more manageable. Okay, you have diarrhea, and obviously the condition of the patient and the history will tell you that it's diarrhea. And then there are other interesting scenarios in which you have renal tubular acidosis, and in this you have loss of bicarbonate in the urine, excessive loss of bicarbonate in the urine, because the tubular cells are damaged and they're not doing their function of reabsorbing bicarbonate, or there is excessive excretion of hydrogen ion. This is basically balanced. Where did the chloride go? You must be thinking. How come we have hyperchloremia in RTA? Well, for electroneutrality, chloride is reabsorbed by this kidney. Okay, because I'll repeat it: loss of excessive bicarbonate or excretion of excessive hydrogen in the urine, both need to be balanced. Okay, so if you are losing a lot of positive ions, chloride will be basically need to be retained back in the body, and hence you have a hyperchloremia in RTA patients. Okay, the other is excessive ammonium chloride ingestion, and this is a famous type of poisoning, and in this the ammonium bit is basically converted into urea in the liver, while the chloride is what gives rise to increased chloride, hyperchloremia, and hence this metabolic acidosis. Okay, so imagine if you have your patient, his or her, the one who brought her in, the attendant will tell you that, look, he or she consumed this bottle, and the bottle would obviously be either labeled, or it will smell, or there'll be some evidence of ammonium chloride, and you'll be able to tell by the chemical analysis that this is an acidosis. The bicarbonate is low, and since the bottle might say ammonium chloride, the chloride is up in this patient. You work out your anion gap, it comes out to be normal. You confirm the diagnosis, you give the antidote, and that's that. By the way, ammonium in its conversion to urea in liver consumes a bicarbonate. Okay, so this also adds to the acidosis. The chloride obviously directly adds to the acidosis.